Hello, I'm Toycat, and the bad news is that annexing your neighbours seems to be back on the table for major powers, and this is something we should condemn, whether it's Russia, China, or the United States threatening to do so. However, I want to argue the controversial counterpoint today that there are actually cases of countries that would be better were they to be fully absorbed by their neighbours. This is something that seems very wild, but by the end of this video, you'll agree there are 4 cases where maybe a country should be annexed by its neighbour, and let's start with our strongest case, and that is for Moldova. So basically, when the USSR was coming west across Europe, trying to take back the World War II gains effectively from Germany, they decided to redistribute a lot of the territory that they came across. A lot of Germany went to Poland, and so a lot of Poland went to Belarus and Ukraine, and a lot of the same happened with Romania. Romania was a much bigger country, and a lot of that territory was taken and split off, particularly into Moldova, which then became part of the USSR proper. Again, I guess you could call it like World War II style, colonialism, more or less, but you get away with it because your enemy is that bad German guy. And so Moldova was split apart from Romania and made a part of the USSR for a very long time, which is why even to this day they have incredibly close ties to Russia. And I had a Moldovan lodger. She spoke fluent Russian. That is just the standard there in a way that it isn't in Romania. And this is very interesting because when Moldova became independent at the fall of the USSR, a lot of Romanians thought, okay, well, this is the time, logically this is going to happen, but only 15 to 20% of Moldovans actually backed that reintegration, a figure that has risen to about 40% now. And so given the political headwinds are clearly starting to line up for Romania and Moldova actually reuniting, how is that going to happen? Well, here's a really decent article from GIS. They are actually founded by the Prince of Liechtenstein, but I find this to be very pragmatic and good at explaining this. Here are the 3 ways which you could see these countries unite. Let's start with the first one, simple unification by absorption. This is what Germany did when it absorbed East Germany. You just say that territory is ours now, and so as a result, not only would the basic law of Romania extend over the territory of Moldova, but also security and law and order authorities, as well as all of the administrative systems would then become Romanian. Obviously the prefectures would have to change, the circulation of a brand new currency, as well as adjusting budgetary flows, etc. This would be hugely disruptive, but in ways that are broadly positive for Moldova. I mean, think about it. The Moldovan average GDP is substantially lower than that of Romania, and so they would become slightly richer overnight, but then a lot of industries in Moldova wouldn't be able to compete with those in Romania, and so there could be some knock-on effects which would be negative. These would be something they would have to go through a lot of work to make sure happen fairly, so that neither Romanians nor Moldovans felt particularly burned by this one, but ultimately a lot of Moldovans already see themselves as Romanians, so at least the ethnic side of things, at least the national identity side of things, would be smoothed over, which is why maybe you might instead want to go for a gradual unification. This is something where instead of saying overnight there is no more Moldova, instead slowly the Moldovan state falls apart in favor of its functions being replaced by Romania. This is something that you could kind of do, except for one of the biggest challenges, which is EU framework. Basically, you can't have an EU and a non-EU territory be fully united, especially on economic terms. The EU negotiates trade deals for all of the EU, and so if the EU doesn't want a trade deal with this other piece of your territory, you run into some issues, to say that at the very least. So yeah, this is something they could do, but it runs into issues of Romania's EU membership, which by the way is one of the biggest ways in which Moldova would benefit from being Romanian, by the way. But the third situation, therefore, is indirect unification, where simply Romania asks very nicely and Moldova agrees to go along with joining the EU. This would mean that Romania and Moldova would remain fully separate legal entities with their own systems and currencies, but over time they would eventually become effectively the same body. As the EU becomes a mega federal state, as is their goal, as they become more politically integrated, the distinction between Moldova and Romania would be as important as the distinction between Baden-Württemberg and Nuremberg, or between the name of the entire state there escapes me, even though it's the biggest one in Germany. Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. The Berlin and Bavaria. The idea of having different places would be like, does it really even matter? It's like Czechia and Slovakia. They used to be one country, and now they have most of the benefits of being one country, but they don't have to share a house anymore. Could Romania and Moldova be like that? I think actually, weirdly enough, the answer is no. I think Moldova getting into the EU ultimately is going to be harder for them than Romania just annexing them unilaterally, and this is probably the easiest way for Moldovans to get EU membership, if that was their goal anyway, but those are the three ways it could happen. If the EU does change their stance on eastward expansion, if they feel like picking up a few extra members, including one particularly distressed one, then obviously Moldova would be the next logical choice, but right now that would be signing up for a lot of extra frontier in a very dangerous region, and is that what the EU is likely to do? Well, not particularly. And so next up, let's talk about, I guess while we're actually in Europe, we can talk about the other easy case of this, because ultimately Cyprus and Northern Cyprus need to merge. I think that even the most ardent Turkish Cypriot could agree on this one. Cyprus used to be a British colony. There were lots of Turkish people, a lot of Greek people. Ethnically speaking, they're actually Cypriots, but they come from one of those two places, and Greece and Turkey, despite having incredibly similar food, do not get along in lots of ways. I think I could simplify their history down into that one sentence, and so as a result, we say that when you have an island that's just made up of half these people, keeping it united is kind of tricky, which is why Northern Cyprus seceded from Southern Cyprus, and why you've got this weird situation of not just two countries in Ireland, but the UN buffer zone in between them, and also the UK still has some territory. So it's the UK, Cyprus, Northern Cyprus, and then a UN enforced buffer zone over here, which is, I mean, to say the least, it's ridiculous, right? But it's also a very fun example of what's happening in this region of the world. If Cyprus just annexed Northern Cyprus, you could also argue vice versa, this would be hugely beneficial, because right now Cyprus can't fully integrate with the EU in terms of Schengen and stuff like that, because one of the key requirements of being a integrated EU member is being able to integrate your own country, and right now Cyprus controls about 50% of itself, which is not ideal. Is there a way that you can easily unite these two countries? Well, that's the struggle, isn't it? It's the Moldova. The reason that every obvious idea on this list hasn't already happened are the struggles of it, politically speaking. Except in Georgia, actually. I think in Georgia there's a much more interesting case, where Georgia has two separate republics existing inside of it, both of which were enforced after Russia's invasion of the region. So similarly, I guess really everything comes down to the USSR and the EU at some point, huh? But basically, the USSR used to include all of these regions, and within Georgia, there were autonomous regions of different people groups. These autonomous regions got to make their own decisions, but when Georgia went independent, they all went independent as a country, until these two guys decided that actually, you know what, Russia's willing to fund us just to make us a bit more nightmarish towards Georgia, and even weirder, Russia has actually moved the border back and forth, literally overnight. They move it. It's a very, very weird situation, and so as a result, Georgia shrinks every single day. If Georgia could just have these places, the world would be a better place for everyone besides Russia. And yeah, who's going to upset Russia to do that? Certainly not anyone who wants to stay on the good sides of a nuclear power. And so Georgia would be better off reuniting with these territories that split from it. At the very least, they would be better off having some official recognition for one of them and maybe reuniting with the other one. But the truth be told is splitting them up is something, because there is a minimum size where a country can actually function in a meaningful way. And I think that size is probably a bit bigger than the tens of thousands of people, but that's just my humble opinion. Speaking of my humble opinion, let's talk about a country much bigger than tens of thousands, because I think that Kenya and Tanzania, I think Kenya should just roll into Tanzania like they own the place. And yeah, this is my bold stance, that all of Africa should be one big, I'm coming in like a British colonialist. I want to redraw these lines in Africa because there's just far too many countries right here. This isn't my opinion, by the way. It's the opinion of the East African Federation. I think a lot of people do tend to think of Africa as being one big lump place, but the truth is there is a lot of similarities between sub-Saharan Africa, between the Sahara, north of Africa, not Saharan Africa. There's a lot of similarities in West Africa over here. There's a lot of similarities in East Africa, and in South Africa, there's a similar thing there too. I would say that the regions of Africa have a lot in common, but the fact that they keep trying to unify as a continent is one of the reasons why they keep not unifying as a continent. And so the East African Federation is something that was proposed literally as soon as these countries went independent, but in 2018, the formal process began of drafting a regional constitution. This was set to be written by 2021 with an implementation in 2023. However, the COVID-19 pandemic means they haven't gotten away with that. Also, for some reason, they decided to add Dr. Congo and Somalia in there, so you've got one of the weirdest looking states in the world, but basically, a lot of countries are thinking of coming together and building what would be the world's 34th biggest biggest economy. That's actually not that impressive. But it would be the world's 3rd biggest country by population and the world's 7th biggest by area. This is the East African Federation. And if you want to know its current status, well, all of the heads of the states agreed to expedite the establishment of a political federation back in 2024. And I made a video covering the issue. No, actually, let's find... this is how I find out how long this has been going on for. If we go to the East African Federation, I guess it would be in countries that would soon exist. I've got too many videos about countries, apparently. Whoops. But the East African Federation... My fail there. But basically, the East African Federation is... or the East African community is something that should exist and something that would be better for all of the countries involved. Because if you're in Africa right now, there's just a big patchwork of countries that, like, it's very hard for them to attract both international investment, but also that name brand and recognizability for tourism. But with Kenya and Tanzania, you already have 2 of the biggest hotspots for international tourists and business. And if you could combine all of this land area together, you would get a place that would be able to punch well above its weight within the African continent. And as the goal is to operate like a federation, you would keep a lot of the individual rights for Dr. Congo and Burundi and Rwanda, while also having all of the economic benefits of one combined market. Because ultimately, this is the only major argument you can make in favor of annexing a country. I think for a long time, we were leading the world towards an era where countries would split apart more and more and more, and this is really great for national identities. If you believe that the most important thing is that your people not have their matters voted on by other people, if you think that it's messed up that people in Utah can vote on what you get to do in Nebraska, or that people in, Florida get to vote on what you do in Alaska, then ultimately you should say, why am I part of this shared country? And the 2 big reasons you would say you should be are economics and stability. And as we move to an era of a very turbulent international economy, I think security and economics are going to bring more countries, if not officially together, then definitely unofficially together. And that is my prediction for the world, that we've seen after Bougainville, which is still to come, by the way, over here. After Bougainville and maybe another nation or 2, we might start to see more countries merge together, and maybe, hopefully we reach a time of peace and prosperity and everyone feels good again, but we might have reached peak country, and that would be interesting if that were true, huh? But anyway, yeah, this is just my fun speculation for the end of the video. For now, just know that eventually, if things go to plan, there won't be a Moldova, and that's not actually a bad thing. Especially because I'm about to visit Romania. I have plans to go to Bucharest. They have the biggest government building in the world. I've heard the stat that it's the heaviest building in the world, but I have no idea how you'd possibly claim that to be true. But yeah, this is if you want proof that Romania used to be communist, here is their former presidential palace. And it is, again, by some measures, the biggest biggest government building in the world. Some measures, the heaviest, apparently. Is that a building that looks like it was built consensually with democracy? I don't think so. And so yeah, I'm going to Romania. And if Romania could just annex their, Romania could just go ahead and annex their neighbor already, then it would bring down the list of countries I need to go to. Because yeah, Romania is about to be country 59. There's a big little blob here that I need to fix, and I'm going to do that. Oh, also, by the way, I should mention this at some point. I have been to Ukraine and Russia, and you gotta watch my videos if you want to see which country has a better McDonald's. Because for now, I hope you'll enjoy this one. And second channel, don't care. Goodbye. I mean, I do care. Wasn't the editing in this one nice? Let me know what you actually think. Did it add anything? I tracked the stats on it, but I'm curious about your subjective opinion. Is this video better than my normal ones, or is it worse? Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.